Okay, so we're going to start up today with exercise 124, and as I said last class, we flipped things around a little bit, so we're going to go out of order back to AutoCAD and do some Illustrator work with AutoCAD to finish up what you need for your assignment 105s. And then next week we'll go back into SketchUp and keep working going forward. So it's not really that out of order because we're going to start on this building in SketchUp when we get back. So it'll be kind of a transition from AutoCAD into SketchUp. I'll talk through how to pull your AutoCAD drawing into SketchUp and then start working from that AutoCAD drawing. So we'll go through that. But today I really want to talk about how do you transition something that is a very basic line drawing from AutoCAD and make it look better. I'd say make it look great, but sometimes it takes a little while to get to the great stage of things. So I want to at least walk through the strategies and how you might go about doing some of these collagings and stuff over the top of your drawing. This is something that I still do in practice when I'm working on drawings. It is frequent that I'll end up pulling a drawing into Illustrator, doing a little bit of the coloring and stuff in Illustrator, especially for the design drawings. You know, if I was working on a set of working drawings for construction documents or something like that, you know, going into Illustrator doesn't make sense because you're dealing with kind of the technical aspects of a building. But if you're trying to show somebody a design or you're trying to create presentation boards or something like that, really Illustrator's a great place with a great set of tools to kind of enhance your drawings and just bump up the quality a little bit. If you move forward in this class and you end up doing 136 in Rhino, I will spend quite a bit of time toward the end of the semester talking about getting line drawings out of Rhino. We'll work in Illustrator to Collage and make them good afterwards. So it's very much part of the standard architectural workflow. So I think it's definitely worth talking about and kind of emphasizing the techniques. So I went ahead and I opened my drawing from last class. I'm in the Layout 1 tab, which was the 24 by 36 inch page that I created with my 5 viewports that have my 4 elevations and my floor plan set up and established. Once I get to this stage, I'm going to, just like we did at last class, of course I could move things around if I wanted to, but they're okay for right now. I'm going to go to the print or plot button, and I'm going to go ahead and make this PDF. Notice that I am, as we specified last time, using the DWG to PDF printer. And it's very important that you use this particular printer because it will make lines that are readable by Illustrator. And you'll see what I mean in just a second when we open the file. So that is DWG to PDF. The reason that I'm emphasizing this is there are other PDF printers available on the list. But we want the DWG to PDF as our printer. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And I'll save it into today's folder. So bear with me for a second while we get to today's folder here. And we are what? At 124 today. Create a new folder. This is fall of 2016. Oops, helps if I can type. And we'll go ahead and save this as exercise 123. And I'll click Save. And by default, when I create this PDF file in AutoCAD, it opens up in Acrobat and shows me a preview of that file. Some of you already had your files open up and you said, well, it doesn't quite look right. Now's our opportunity to fix it. We're not going to work in Acrobat because we don't have enough tools in Acrobat to really be useful. We are instead going to work in Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Adobe Illustrator. And hopefully Illustrator will actually work for me. That would be a beneficial thing. Apparently I should have opened Illustrator prior to class starting. Try this again. All right, appears to have worked the second time, so go figure. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the File menu, and I'm just going to go to File Open. I'm not going to import or anything fancy. It's just opening the PDF file, and that's something that people lose in translation a fair amount. Illustrator can actually open PDF files natively. And you can save, instead of a .ai, which we've been saving, you can save your Illustrator work as a .pdf. Because it will work just natively with the PDF file. I think Adobe in the long run is going to convert the AI file format just to be a PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Open. And we're going to go to my folder for today, 124. And there's my layout. I'll go ahead and open. Now if I press Control-0 on the keyboard, I can see the overall page layout, okay, which looks exactly the same as it did in AutoCAD. That's a good thing. Okay? But one of the important features here, if I use the direct select or the white arrow, is I can actually select any of the individual lines that came out of AutoCAD. So they're not a flat drawing. It's not a JPEG. It's not like what we just produced in SketchUp, where it was just a flat drawing and we had to collage it in Photoshop. These are actual lines that we can work with. So if, for example, I decided that, you know, my baselines here under my buildings really aren't thick enough, I could use this white arrow, the direct select tool, and I could go through and I could select all of those lines at the bottom here. And then I could go over to my stroke menu, and I could change the weight from its 1.68 points to maybe 3 points. Let's make it a little bit more so you can see it, right? And so now those lines are all a little bit thicker. So I can actually manipulate the lines once I'm in Illustrator, which is a big skill or big strategy on what we're trying to do. So I went ahead and I made those lines a little bit bigger. Let's take a look at the layers stack here so that we can kind of see how AutoCAD writes and makes layers for us. If we look here, we have just the layer 1, which means everything's on technically the same layer. If I click the little triangle to expand the nested layers, we see that we have 5 clip groups. And each of these clip groups represents one of the drawings. So this first one is down here on whatever that would be. That would be the east elevation, right? Then I have the west elevation, right? There's my north elevation. There's my south elevation, and there's my floor plan. Okay, so each of those is established as its own clip group. Okay, the reason it's a clip group is because AutoCAD makes the viewport and everything inside the viewport is this clip group. We can actually go ahead and for ease of working with this drawing, we can release the clipping groups so that we don't have them stuck in these groups anymore. So if I took the first clip group and I right-clicked on the layer, if I click the little flyout, I could come down here to release clipping mask. It's about 6 options down, 5 options down. And it switches from being a clip group to just a regular group. Okay? By doing this, we eliminate future problems. So I'm going to go through on each of these and eliminate the clip group. Okay? So I'll select the next layer, go to the flyout menu, and say Release Clipping Mask. I'll go to the next one, flyout, Release Clipping Mask. Next one here, flyout, Release Clipping Mask. Next one, flyout, Release Clipping Mask. Okay, so I now have no clipping masks, just the groups. If I looked, this last one here is the floor plan. If I looked inside this group, we'd see a bunch of individual lines. Okay, lots and lots and lots and lots. Look at the length of this. Okay, so there's obviously a reason we're keeping it as a group, because we don't need to work on any of those individual lines. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep that closed down, and we know that this last one is my floor plan. Okay? So now we're going to start talking about what if we wanted to change some of the objects, or we wanted to fill in some of the objects or something like that. So it depends a little bit on how your drawing was created. But for the most part, if we wanted, say, to fill in the floor with a particular color, we're going to have to paint in the floor. Okay? It's not an actual object. I can't select an object that represents the floor because all we have are just the individual lines themselves. So I'm going to use the Live Paint tool, which a lot of you used on your Charlie Harper assignments. I'm going to do the same thing here. Remember, whenever I do a Live Paint, though, I like to have a duplicate of my original layers. So I keep my original layers intact. Let's duplicate that. So I'm going to go to Layer 1. I'm going to go to the little flyout. And I'm going to say Duplicate Layer 1. And it's now Layer 1 Copy. I'm going to go ahead and rename Layer 1 Copy to be Live Paint, just so that I know that that is the Live Paint layer, and that's what I'm going to be working on. So I have the live paint layer here. If I select all of the floor plan, for example, and I come over to the live paint tool, which is often hidden under this shape builder tool over here. By the way, you can press K on the keyboard and it'll jump you directly to the live paint tool. I don't use the keyboard shortcuts when I'm lecturing to you because you don't know what key I pressed. It's too hard for me to do that, so I always pick the tools. So, live paint bucket. When I move over my drawing, you see the little red text that says click to make a live paint group. If you did not release the clipping mask like I did in the beginning, it will throw up an error that says you can't make it when you try to create it. So if you come across that error, chances are it's because you already have a clipping mask in place. OK, so I'm going to start to fill this in with a particular color. Before I pick my color, before I actually start clicking, so I don't know, let's pick red, and I'll start filling this in. OK, for some reason, when AutoCAD files come out, they are not in RGB color mode. They're in grayscale. OK, that's just something that AutoCAD does. So I'm going to switch over here under my colors. There, color tab. It's the first one. I'm going to go to the little flyout and switch to RGB, which gives me the RGB colors. And then we can pick the red. Right, I can pick it back here. Something like that. And then we'll just paint over. To me, it's useful to pick bright colors. Obviously, I'm not going to use red for the floor long term. But if I pick a bright color, it's easy to see, oh, all the red I want to be the floor, ultimately. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill in the floors. Let's fill in inside the closet there, fill in the bathroom there, and we'll fill that piece there. Okay, so I have all the floor colored right now. I'm going to switch my color, I don't know, to maybe blue, and we'll fill in the walls. Let me zoom in a little bit. I just press Control+ to zoom in. And I'm going to pick inside of these walls. All right, let me zoom in a little bit more. I've got a few little pieces to pick inside here. Already got that one. I need that one. A couple right here. To me, it's always helpful to do all of the fills in one session. So if there's anything that I think I'm going to fill in with a color long term, I would rather do it right now when I'm doing the live paint, rather than going back and adding to the live paint. You can run into some trouble long term when you do that. OK, so I've done the floors and I've done the walls. That's all I'm going to do in this plan view to start. So with the floors and the walls done, I'm going to click on this expand button that's at the ribbon at the top of the page. And that expand button then takes it out of being the live paint and gives me my own separate objects. So let's go ahead and click on the expand button. And I could now use the direct select, the white arrow. Let me click off so nothing's selected. And I could come in and select just the red. Okay? Now I'd like to have something applied to this. Maybe it's a swatch, maybe it's a texture of some kind. I'll show you a couple different strategies as we go forward. Let's start with the simplest, which would be a swatch. Okay? I have some swatches that are available online that are based on the Prismacolor markers. You may or may not be familiar with Prismacolor markers. They were something that I was kind of obsessed with in grad school. I really liked drawing with them. And I had a whole bundle and I had a bunch of colors. But I needed the digital equivalent. If I could draw with these by hand, I needed, when I worked in Illustrator or whatever, I needed the equivalent of them. So I made these swatches to mimic the colors that I tended to use. So under the featured swatches, this is, by the way, under resources and then swatches. The first swatch here is the Prismacolor markers, the architectural set. If you click on it, it will allow you to download the Illustrator. We want the CS4 Plus version right there, which you can download. It will download an Illustrator file. The reason that this isn't a Swatch Exchange file and the other swatches are Swatch Exchange is because if you look carefully at this, see how it has some streaks to the coloring? I did that as part of this swatch so that it mimics if you were coloring it by hand. Right? So this is really designed to be as if you took your markers out and colored in your drawing afterward. I wanted it to look that way. So now that I have those downloaded, I tend to save these on a folder in my flash drive so that I can use them again and again. So we'll copy it. I'll go to my flash drive in my resources folder. I think I put it in Illustrator, Swatches. There, it's already there. Okay. So now in the world of Illustrator, we'll come back. I'm going to go to my swatches, which are right here. I don't have any swatches currently loaded. I'll click on the little flyout menu. And when I do that, I'll go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library. And then I'll go to my flash drive, into Illustrator, into Swatches, and pick that architectural marker set. That will open up a little floating set of swatches. So now that I have these, I want to assign these floors to that marker. So let's go ahead and select the first floor, which is red. Okay? And I want the rest of the floors to be selected as well. I could go through and I could hold down Shift and I could click on each of the red, though many times it's easier to go up to the Select menu and say Select Same Fill Color. Okay? Part of the reason that when I create the live paints, as I pick different colors for each of the different regions I'm going to fill in, is because this selection method is a lot easier than going through and holding down Shift and clicking on everything. So if I select Same Fill Color, all the red objects here will show up. So now I'm going to move those red objects onto their own layer. So let me go ahead and create a new layer. And here under Layer 3, let me call this Floor. And I'm going to move all of the red onto the Layer 3 or Floor layer. All right. So now that I have those on the Floor layer, let's move that below Layer 1 so that we see it below. I'm going to go ahead and apply the architectural markers swatch. And so I might pick something that's kind of a light gray. You guys probably can't see that at all. Right? How about that one? Can you see it a little better? No. Good old projector. No, you really can't see any of it. You can see that. It's really ugly, but you could see it. Okay? So the point is that I can apply this swatch to my building, okay, or to my floor plan in that case. I'm going to go back to one of the grays, even though you can't see it as well, just because the other is too ugly. Okay? So now that I have the gray for the floor, it's as if I lightly colored in the floor, I want to go back and I want to do the same thing for the walls. So I'll select one of the walls, and I'll probably need to zoom in a little bit. There it is. And now that that's selected, I'll go back up to the Select menu and select the same fill color, which gives me all those blue objects. We'll go ahead and create another new layer. I'll call this layer Walls. And I'll move the blue square up onto the Walls layer. That's how I'm changing the layer that these are on. My guess is you've already changed layers before in one of your other drawings, but I'm just reminding you that that's how you change layers. So now I have a Walls layer and I have a Floor layer. So maybe I want all of the objects on the Walls layer to be dark. So maybe I'll fill them in as if I colored them in with a black marker. And if we zoom out, we can see that this is starting to read as a pretty nice plan. Okay? It's subtle, but at the same time, if this were hung on the wall, it's not as good on the projector. But if it were hung on the wall, the subtle tone to this is the building versus this is not the building, by having the gray floors, will help the building to stand out. The black walls, while it can be a little heavy-handed or it can look a little heavy, sometimes when you're putting it on a wall, it's the easiest way of making your building read. And that's something that you have to kind of identify. Usually you have to do a test print to see if it looks right on the wall. But you want people to be able to read your floor plan maybe from 3, 4, 5, 12 feet away. And you want to think about, is your floor plan reading? This floor plan would read very, very nicely at that distance. Okay? So now I've done the floor plan, and I'm fairly happy with how it looks. It looks reasonable. Let's move on to one of the elevation views. Okay? So we'll leave the layer, the walls and the floor are on. There they are. And I'm going to go ahead, let's turn all the rest of this off. I'm going to work with just this piece of the drawing. So this front elevation here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll select it. Oops, I don't need that lower piece. I just need this. There it is. And I want to do the same live paint to it. And I actually realized that I made a mistake and I did my live paints on layer 1 instead of on the live paint layer. But since I already did that, I'll stick with it. I could rename this to be layer 1 for organization purposes, and I could rename this to be live paint. That was just my mistake on which layer I was using. So I have these selected. Let's go back to my live paint tool. And again, I'm going to make a live paint group. And then I want to fill in these regions. So we'll go ahead and change my color here. And I'll use the red again. I don't want there to be a line around. Come on. Does not want to apply none for me. No, I don't know why. It's not reading none, so we're going to go with it. OK, so I'm going to go ahead and fill these in. So we'll start. Actually, you know what? This is just bugging me. I want, whoa. It conveniently applied the stroke color to the whole drawing. All right, back up. When in doubt, we'll just back up. If it'll let me. OK, there we are. Oh, too far. All right, we're back. OK, so let me go back. And before we start here, I'm going to flip my colors. I'll make my background red. And then we'll go to the live paint tool, which is right here. And I'm going to go ahead and live paint this. But I need to select it first. So let's go ahead and select it. There it is. Now we'll go to live paint. Pick red. And I'm going to go ahead and start filling in the regions. So I'll start with the things that are concrete. Right? So these are my concrete objects there. Now I want to do all of the windows. So let's do blue for the windows. And I'll need to zoom in a bit. So I've got window, window, window. Oops. You guys have to bear with me while I go through and actually click all these. OK, so I have all the windows done. Now I want the frames of all the windows done. So let's pick another color. And I'll do the frames of the windows. So do that. Oops. OK, so now I have all the frames done. So you see how I walked my way through, and I made sure that I got all the pieces that I think long-term I'm going to color in. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and click on the Expand button, just like I did before. And now I have individual pieces. So let me zoom out just a little bit more so we see it like that. And so now I could select, for example, the red object. And I could go to Select, Same Fill Color. All the red selected. We can move those onto a new layer. And we'll call this Elevation Walls. And I'll move that onto the Elevation Walls layer. So there they are, as just the walls. I'll do the same thing for each of these other pieces. So we'll do the windows. Let me select Same Fill Color. Create a new layer. Elevation Windows. And we'll move that. And then the last piece is these little frames. So let me zoom in. We'll select it. I'll say Select Same Fill Color. And then we'll create a new layer for this as well. So once again, this is going to be Elevation Win Frames, like that. So each of those is its own separate layer, which effectively allows me to turn off the lines and then concentrate just on one of these. So let's look at the walls first. So I have everything else off except for the walls. So as we did before, right, it would be fairly easy to select all the walls, select Same Fill Color, and I could make all the walls one of the gray Prismacolors, okay, which would look reasonable. But I may want to take this a step further. I may want to add some actual texture to it. I may want to find a photograph and collage in a real material to it. And actually, before I do the walls, let's start with the windows. So let's go to the windows, because I think this one might be the most obvious use. Okay, so right now, as blue objects, they're not that great. I don't really have a good blue for my architectural markers set, so I need something to fill it in. Could I select them all and change their color to be kind of a lightish blue color, like a sky color? Sure, I could do something like that. But it's not going to turn out that well. So what if instead I went online and I did a Creative Commons search for a sky? So let's look for Flickr. Let's say cloudy sky. Right? Now I could pick one of these images. So maybe something like this is kind of interesting. Maybe that's a little too much. Maybe I want it to be a little fainter. Maybe something like this. Okay? So I could go ahead and I could download this file. We'll download an original size. And then I want to copy this file into my flash drive. Now I have a resources folder on my flash drive, and inside of this, it might just be on my computer, I usually have a folder that has all of my collage textures in it. And for whatever reason, I thought I had it here, but I don't. I only have my grunge textures. I don't have my skies. So the point is, on my computer at home, I tend to have a folder that has stuff that I've collected over time, because once you find a good sky background, generally it's nice to use that sky background if you can. Okay? So I have it. Let's go ahead and create a new folder here on my flash drive. And we'll say background images. This will not be the last time we use background images. We'll end up using them in Photoshop as well in the coming weeks. So saving these is pretty good. Let's go ahead and create one more new folder. And we'll go ahead and paste that sky there. So let me go back to the world of Illustrator. And I would like to use these objects to clip an image of the sky. Right? So it's kind of like in the world of InDesign when we span multiple frames. It's a similar strategy. So I need to have more than one of these boxes act as my frames. So I need to start by selecting all of the boxes. And if we looked at the layer right now, we'd see that there's a bunch of individual paths. That's not going to work. So instead of all those individual paths, let's select them all and go up to the Object menu, go to Compound Path, Make. Okay? When I do this Compound Path Make, you'll see that it changes from all those individual objects into one compound object. It's basically combining all the objects together. So I now have my elevation windows layer, and I have a compound path underneath it. Just one object. That's it. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and go to File, and then Place. And I'm going to drop in that file that I just downloaded. Background images, skies, there it is. And we'll go ahead and place this in. Way too big, so let's zoom out, and let's make this smaller. So I'll use the free transform tool. I'll make this smaller. Something like that. Now I want this to be larger than my overall object, but I also want the image to be above, or the compound paths to be above the image, right? So that I can see what's going to be doing the clipping. So I just changed the order on my layer. By the way, if you get a little bit lost in these, there is a walkthrough that actually goes all the way through this. Clipping mask from Live Paint. It's Illustrator 3.15. There's a little video, and this will take you through step by step. It's a lot of steps, but it'll make sure that you can go from Live Paint all the way to creating this clipping mask. OK, so I just wanted to point out that it was there. So I have this, and this will not be the last time I do it. I'm going to do it a couple times today, so you'll see me do it. So I have my windows in a compound path on top of my linked image file. Once I have them in this order, it has to be this particular order on the layer. So compound path, then linked file. I'm going to select the main layer itself. I'm going to go up to the little flyout menu, and I'm going to say make clipping mask. And when I do that, it's going to clip the image so that just the clouds show through in where the windows are. So now if I were to turn back on my elevation, right, you can see everywhere that there's a window, I now have clouds, which is a better way of representing than just blue squares. Okay? Maybe these clouds are a little bit strong in the overall composition. They might be a little tight, in which case it might not be a bad idea to adjust the opacity. So I'll come up here to the transparency setting, and I'll change the opacity down to maybe 50%. And so they kind of fade out just a little bit. They're not quite as strong. It's still better than just a solid color. So maybe, since you guys are seeing it on the projector, maybe we'll do 70%. All right? So now I was able to create the windows and where they are. So let's go ahead and go to my layers. I'm going to close this. I'm going to lock the layer. And I'm also going to move it down below in the layer stack so that everything else is above it. Okay, so all the lines show up above it, and I have just the windows showing. So let's go ahead and say I wanted to collage the concrete part. So we'll go to the elevation walls layer. Let's turn that on. And turn off the rest, which I currently have the swatch applied to. But let's say I wanted to put concrete on this instead. So I could go ahead and I could select the first one. I could say select same fill color. There it is. And then I could go find an image of concrete. This is, of course, assuming that my building was concrete. Okay. So I'll jump back here to the Creative Commons search. And maybe I'll type in concrete and see what comes out. I might need concrete texture. So I have a couple different strategies here. I could try to find something that has some strong building texture. So I could say maybe board form. Oops, I can't type. It's giving me terrible results. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, so depending, you have to kind of sort through how you want to find it. But I could have something that has a really strong texture to it. That's a repeating pattern, for example. So something like this or something like this. Let's go ahead and use this one that has the little concrete tiles. So maybe I want to do something like this. Let's go ahead and download this image. I'll do the original size. Go ahead and show it in my folder. There it is. I'm going to copy it and put it into my resources, background images, and let's create a new folder for concrete. And I'll go ahead and I'll paste this. There it is. So let's go back to Illustrator. So same thing. These are all separate objects right now. We can see them all right there as separate objects. I want them all to combine together. So I'll go to Object, Compound Path, Make. Takes all the individual objects, makes them one. Then we'll go ahead and place my background image in. So I'll go to File, Place, and let's pick that concrete. There it is. And I'll place it. Now, obviously, the scale of this is too big, so we need to make it smaller. So we'll make it smaller. And because this is a strong textured pattern, I have to kind of think about what's the appropriate scale for this on my building. Right? So how big should one of these squares really be? And so maybe they need to be about like that. Okay? So in this case, this one image isn't big enough to cover my whole building. So at this point, I can go ahead and I can copy this linked file. But before I do that, I want to make sure that the path is above the linked file. Remember, it always has to be the compound path, the shape that you want to do the cutting out, needs to be above the linked file. So I'll go ahead and take this first one, Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste. I have a second version of it. We'll get those to line up. And then we'll keep going. And because I put in tiling texture, these should hopefully, form a seamless pattern as we go across my building. Okay, so see how I have all of these? I want to take all of those linked files, here they all are, and again, make sure that they're below the path so that I have my building that's going to do the cutting on top. Once I have them in that order, I'll go back to the elevation walls layer, the main walls layer. We'll click on the little flyout menu and say Make Clipping Mask, and it will clip my building for just that texture. Okay? So again, similar. This is probably a little strong. I'll hold down Shift to select all of them. I'll go to Opacity, and I'll change the opacity down to maybe 70%. Oops. My bad. Doesn't look like I actually selected them. Take all of those. All right, so I have all of them selected. I'll go to Opacity, and I'll change that down to maybe 70% or so. Okay, so now I can couple that with, move it down below everything else. I can turn on that. I can turn on my windows, and I can also turn on my overall line drawing, and we can start to see how it layers up, and it gives a little texture for what this looks like. Okay, this has a lot of steps to it. It used to be something in class that we would spend like a week or 3 or 4 class days really hammering this in, because this is the way, when I was in undergrad and grad school, that we did collaging. Times have changed a little bit. It happens in the world of architectural design and what software is available, and it's really shifted more in the direction of Photoshop and doing the collage work in Photoshop. So for now, we will spend the predominant amount of time going forward working more in Photoshop than we will in Illustrator. And that's okay, but I like to at least introduce Illustrator as a concept, because you can do a lot of strong collage work in Illustrator. There is an extension of what I've been talking about that may be useful down the road for you under exercises, or excuse me, under tutorials. If you go to Illustrator, this envelope distort, the 3.16, can actually take a texture and warp it to fit the side of a building if you had a perspective drawing or something. It can be very, very cool. But I don't emphasize that as much as I used to, because we tend to do that work in Photoshop rather than in Illustrator. But I at least wanted to point that out. So now we have our drawing relatively worked out. We have, if we zoom out a little bit, I could turn back on the floor plan. Turn that back on. There we go. Oops, wrong. Right, so we have my floor plan. Let me turn those walls back on. We have a little bit of collage work. One of the important things, though, when you're doing this kind of thing, is to think about what looks best. Right? Does this look good as an overall drawing? Should all of the buildings have this concrete tiling pattern on them? Is it too dark? Is it too light? Does it overwhelm the architecture? Do we focus on the fact that there's a sky background rather than looking at the building itself? You have to decide what is too much. All too often when I do these explanations, I just show you all these strategies, and it's easy to say, oh, well, I'll just do this for everything, right? And I'll color everything in the entire drawing. Sometimes that's a bit much. Sometimes if we were to edit, we might say, you know what, it looks better to just emphasize the windows. And furthermore, those windows should really be softer overall. So I'll come back and I'll adjust the opacity of those windows to be down to 30% or something, so they just fade away. You have to decide what's the right amount. How much of this collaging do you really want to have? So now that we have this, it's time to start improving this a little bit further. Maybe we need to add some text. Maybe we need to identify what buildings are what buildings. So let's take a look at the elevation again. Right? So on the elevation, I probably need to put some text in. And remember, this is going to be 24 inches by 36 inches. The temptation for text is always, let me go ahead and create a piece of text, is to say, okay, this is elevation. Whoops. Come on. My fonts are messed up here. Hold on a second. There we go. Let me create a new layer on top of everything else. I'll call that layer text. and then I can lock everything else so that I don't accidentally select it or anything. And then we'll go ahead and create a new text, and we'll say this is elevation. And what was this elevation? This was my south elevation. So let's call it south elevation. Okay? So the temptation with text is always, oh, well, I'm looking at this drawing, and my drawing's so big, I really need to like make huge text. So you come over here into the text, and you say, okay, I want it to be like, yeah, all right, that looks good, right? And we make these giant blocks of text, and we say, okay, that's the south elevation. Okay? When you print this out, it will not look good, I promise. Okay? So all too often, every time, and this should be a hint for your grading of assignment 105, text is too big. Right? It's always too big. So we need to shrink that text down. Okay? There are rare circumstances where it can work, and that's generally if it's part of something else. Okay? So if I had ground below this building, and I'll show you a quick example of that. Let me drop this down here just so you can see. If it becomes part of the graphics, then it works. If it's just text, it doesn't. So let's say that I had a ground line and I filled in the ground. Right? So it was something like this where it was filled in. And I made that whole ground kind of a grayish color. All right, and actually, let me adjust this really quick. I wanted the bottom to be straight. I made it too fast. Whatever, close enough. Okay, I have that ground. Maybe I put this text on top of the ground, slightly overlapping. Let me go to Type, Create Outlines. And then I'll do a Pathfinder of these objects. Remember we did Pathfinder before. Let me go to Window, Pathfinder, and where did Pathfinder show up? Is it hiding on me? There it is. It's floating. Sorry, just couldn't see it. And then we might do maybe a subtract. And so south elevation becomes part of the ground or the weight of the building. In that context, it tends to work out okay because it's part of the drawing as opposed to being text. When it's something like up here and we want to put the text in, small is good. So I might say south, and I might make that text, no, I don't know. Sorry, maybe 18 point. Right, maybe a little bit less, maybe 14 point. Right? You guys have some sense of size because you're used to writing, your English paper because you want it to be longer. You write it in 12 point font, right? So you know how big 12 point is. Okay, so think relative to that. That's readable. It doesn't have to be gigantic. So here it is. I have south elevation. I arrange it as part of this drawing. It's subtle, gives me a nice bit of information. Okay, I could go a little bit bigger if I wanted to. The other thing that sometimes people do is they get creative and they say, okay, I don't want it to be all caps. I want it to be, oops. Right? Nothing wrong with that. We as architects like character recognition, so we do individual characters. You have to concentrate when you read it. It's just habit. Okay? But you could do it that way. We could stack south and elevation, right, so that they come together. We could justify it the opposite direction. So it becomes south elevation that way. It's up to you, whatever feels right to you. But again, smaller is better. Font choice is also important, right? Given my design, it kind of would make sense to do a sans serif font. So I pick something like an Arial or a Myriad that's a very clean font, and I use that font. There is always a temptation to use one of the architectural fonts. I'm guilty of this. I tend to use it. I have my favorite. There's a link to it. It's actually free. You can buy the premium version of it, but it's called Frank the Architect. That's been done by a guy. He made this font. Let's see. Of course, it's going slow. This So it looks very much like a handwritten architectural lettered font. Okay? If you're doing working drawings or you're doing something that's more on the technical side, it would be appropriate to use this. If you're doing your big presentation drawings for your 220 studio, you might get away with just a clean, simple font. You don't really need the architectural font. But it's a personal preference. It's up to you. Remember, we talked about the fact that you can load this temporarily on the system if you wanted to. So if you wanted to use this font, you absolutely could. So we have that. Okay? Now, sometimes it's appropriate to add a little bit of a scale. So we knew that we did this drawing in 1/4 inch equals a foot. So maybe I need to add a bar scale, a graphic scale to this drawing so that we know what the scale is. I've prepped a few scales for you that you can download. They're in the downloadable resource packages. If we go here under resources, downloadable resource packages. Right here, we have, hold on a second, download a zip of title blocks, graphic bar scales, and notes for Illustrator or InDesign. Okay, those are prep files for you, so you can just use them. So I'll go back to Illustrator, I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll go find those. So they should be in my Resources folder under Illustrator, under Title Box, and here's my drawing scale. So I have drawing scale casual, right, and I have drawing scale clean. I'm going to use the clean one for right now because I think it'll match my drawing better. There it is. The graphic bar scale, 1/4 inch equals a foot, so there's 1 to 4. So I'll go ahead and say Place. I'll say OK. And now I have a little graphic bar scale. If we were to zoom in here, that tells me how big my drawing is. Make sense? Okay, so I have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of text. Sometimes you want to do a little note that goes with your drawings. This is more common for more technical drawings. So I might type something. Let's say this is a window. All right, so there's window. And I can simply use the pen tool. And I can draw from right here. Remember, if we click and hold, we can create an arc. And I could come down to say something like that. I'm going to flip so that I have a line. And I'll go to my stroke menu and add an arrowhead at the end. And I'll use maybe that arrow. And now suddenly I have a little note for that being a window. Okay, for the sake of what you're doing for exercise 105, you don't have to put notes in. It's going to be fairly obvious what's a window. But I'm just showing you this. Should you want to do this, or should somebody ask you to do it? You could modify this a little bit because it arcs up. If I was being technical, I'd probably pull this down so it's a little bit more straight out of it. Okay? So there's an example there as well. Maybe you want a title block. I have some title blocks that have been prepared for you. I can go to File and then Place, and I can drop in a title block. So if we come down here, we have title blocks. Unfortunately, they're all casual. I need to do one for a cleaner one. So here's the title block, casual, small, 24 by 36. I'll go ahead and place, and I'll say OK. And it will then drop in. And let's make this fit on my page. Something like that. I'm going to go ahead and embed this into my drawing so that I can edit it. So I'll click on Embed. It's going to tell me that the Frank the Architect font is missing. That's fine. I'll say OK. And I'll end up making modifications. Now, it would be nice also if I sent this to the back. So if I right-click and I say Arrange, Send to Back, it should go behind all of those drawings. But ultimately, it probably should be on its own layer at the bottom of the layer stack. So let me go ahead and add a layer. And we'll call this Title Block. Oops. I'm going to move my title block onto the title block layer, and I'll drop the title block all the way to the bottom of my drawing. Oh, looks like I accidentally selected my text. Move that back up to the text layer. There we go. And I really don't need this south elevation sign. So now if we zoom in, I have a little title block that goes around. I can double click on these. If you just keep double clicking, eventually it'll let you edit. And I could see this is Yosemite Cattleman or whatever, sheet 1 of 1, you get the idea. Okay? So I could do something like that. When I'm done, I just click this back button here to get out of that editing, and we can look at the overall drawing. Okay, so I've made these modifications to get ready for this. When I'm all done with my drawing, I can go ahead and go to File, Save. I don't have to do a Save As. Because this was already a PDF file, all the changes that I've made will stay with the PDF file. It also means that this is something that you can open in the world of Acrobat. Okay, so now that I'm done with this, we can go ahead and close it. And as part of your assignment 105, you actually have to print this. And I want you to have the experience of plotting, because it's something that you'll be doing, assuming you stay in this major, a lot down the road. Okay? Plotting is one of those things where no matter how much you think you know what you're doing, something will go wrong. It always does. Okay? You need to give yourself lots of time to plot. If you come in on the morning, on Monday morning when this is due, Monday the, what is it, the 23rd or 21st. If you walk in on the 21st, okay, remember I pushed the date back. This is the week of Thanksgiving, the Monday before Thanksgiving break. If you walk in on that Monday at 7:50 and say, oh, I'm going to print this out, guess what? Not going to happen. Okay? So you got to give yourself time. And this is the case in this class. There's going to be 30 of you trying to print, but it's in the case of every studio that you'll take. You're in 220. You're in 221, right? You have to print usually about a week before the actual presentation happens. At least that's the ideal setup. Because if you don't, something will go wrong, the printer will run out of ink, the belt in the printer will break and fray, and you won't be able to print. Everything happens when you try to print. Okay? From a strategy standpoint, when you're in studio class, print your drawings early, because that's easy, and then work on your model for the last week, and spend your time on the model. Okay? Even if there are subtle changes, you can always adjust, or you can always reprint something at the last minute. But if you have one to go on the wall, you at least have something for the wall. The worst thing that you can do going into a review is not have something on the wall or be late. Reviewers hate it when you're late. I promise you that. Okay? So, in this class, part of your grade on assignment 105 is going to be handing me a physical print of this drawing. Okay? So you have to plan ahead. You have to be able to give this to me. Okay? And trust me, it's not that I want 30-something of these drawings floating around. You can have them right back. But I need you to go through the exercise of printing. So I want to talk about printing. Okay? And it may or may not work beautifully on this printer. You may have to go into the lab next door. And so I'll try to walk you through those things. Hopefully it's been installed on this particular printer. We'll see. So instead of printing from Illustrator, I'm going to open my drawing as a PDF in Acrobat. So let me go find my drawing. Oops. There it is. And if I double click on it, it's not going to open in Illustrator. It's going to open in PDF, which is exactly what I want. So there it is in PDF format. I'm going to go to File and then Print. Okay? And what I'm looking for is this one, this ET116 T520C. Okay? The ET116 T520C, I believe there is also an ET124 T520C, okay, is one of the two plotters that's in the other room over there. It's the black one, okay, in the other room. It should have a roll of paper already in it. It's cheap quality paper, and for the sake of what we're doing here, this is practice more than anything else, so I don't care that it's not going to be the best quality. When you do your 220 project, you should buy a good roll of paper and put it in the printer and then print on good paper. Okay? We as a school provide you with these plotters really cheap. I think for this drawing, you'll spend 25 cents to give it to me. If you took this drawing to Kinko's, you'd pay $6 to $10 a square foot for the drawing. So if you do the math, right, 2 by 3, you're at 6 times 10, $60. Okay? So 25 cents is a lot better deal than $60. Wouldn't you agree? Okay? So be thankful that you have the access to these plotters. And go ahead and spend a little money on some quality paper when you get down the road. For this class, no worries. We're not going to worry about it. So I'm going to pick this 116 T520C. And we've had some trouble with some of the computers on the network not wanting to print nicely, okay, or getting hung up here waiting to actually say yes, you can print on the printer. So I'm going to give this a little time and hope that it works so I can go through the actual dialog box with you. If, however, it's having trouble, one of the fantastic things about having all the computers in the lab be Windows 10 is that over in that lab, right, there's a cord on the back of those printers that you can just take and plug into your computer. And you can bypass this whole system. It will recognize the plotter, and you can just print straight to the plotter. Okay? So don't be afraid of that big, long USB cord. Just plug it in, and it will work. Okay? And that's a good way around it. So because this is doing its nice little hanging freezing thing, I will pause for a while, and we'll come back once it's actually selected as a printer, because I want to talk you through some of the options and stuff of the printer. Okay? So go ahead and start your working in Illustrator, and then I'll interrupt you once it's actually picked this as the printer. Apparently, all it took was me to tell you to start working, and then it would work for me. OK, so I have it set up as the ET116 T520C printer on GoPrint. Because it's on GoPrint, I'll have to go over to the print card reader and pay 25 cents. Okay? So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and click the Properties button. And then in the Properties button, I have to make some adjustments. So you see right now the document size is set for letter. Well, obviously, this is not a letter-sized piece of paper. So we're going to change. And if ArcD was listed here, we would pick ArcD. But it's not. So we'll click on the More button at the bottom. Once that's there, we can look down, and we'll see under Architectural, there's Architectural D. Okay, with that selected, I'll go ahead and say OK. And we now have Architectural D, 24 by 36. It depends a little bit on the roll size as to which way it comes out. Let me see what's currently loaded here. Printer information not available, OK? So how nice. And of course, it's not responding. So again, we have to wait. Patience. OK, so it came back as ArcD. Now, as I'm looking at this, it appears that the roll is 36 wide, okay, but it's trying to print it only 24 wide by 36 long. If it came out this way, I could take it to the paper cutter and I could cut it. That would be fine. But since it's turning that way, I'm going to click on Custom, and I'm going to flip the width and the length. So I'll do a width of 36 and a length of 24, right? And we'll call this 36 by 24. I'll click Save. And apparently, it still doesn't want to do it. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Under Print Quality, Standard Options, we can go all the way to Speed. You don't need a high color print. That's fine. If you were doing your final project, you'd probably be going the opposite direction. But for this, we don't need to worry about it. Okay. So we'll go ahead and use paper settings here. We can either use the printer settings, or we could specify, yes, I want the roll. Right? And the paper type is probably going to be just plain paper. Okay? It's always helpful to go through the other options. Most of the time, nothing else here will be useful to you. Let's go to Layout and Output. Here we go. Let's switch to Landscape. That was what I was after. Okay, so now it's efficient use of paper. Okay? And under resizing options, we want it to be actual size. If it wasn't set for actual size, the scale of our drawing would be off. Remember, we specified 1/4 inch equals a foot. If we change and scale it in the printer, we won't be able to measure it at 1/4 inch equals a foot anymore. So we'll make sure it's actual size. We'll make sure it's landscape. Right? None of the rest of these options are relevant. We only need one copy. We'll come to the next tab of color. Right? We do want it to print in color. That's good. Under services here, doesn't look like we need anything there. Let's go to advanced. Right? Make sure there's nothing else. Manage. Right? All of this is fine. Sometimes it will fail to print, in which case you can use the troubleshoot, and there's usually an option to say store the memory in the computer instead of the printer. But my guess is it will print fine for all of you. Okay? Now that I'm done with all of those options, I'll say OK. And then I can go ahead and send this to the printer. Now it looks like it's still not seeing the paper size quite yet. So let me click on size in this dialog box and see if it updates. It may just not have updated yet. Okay, we just want to make sure everything agrees. So I'll let this go a little longer, and assuming that it updates, I'll go ahead and click on print, and it will send the printer over there. Okay? If you're struggling with these like hanging moments like I am, just take the printer and plug it into a computer and you won't have this problem. Make sense? Okay, so I'll turn you loose. I'll stop bothering you, but this was the process of going through and actually plotting. Remember to give yourself lots of time. That's critical. And then you'll give me the actual plot as part of your assignment 105, which is due on Monday the 21st.